You should be live now.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining another UAA Professional Development Seminar Series. I'm honored to introduce our guest today, Dr. Erin Crotham, Research Assistant Professor from Alaska Center for Energy and Power. Dr. Crotham is a geospatial data scientist with a strong interest in decision-making focused on energy and northern applications. Dr. Crotham has been a Google Cloud research innovator, worked as a project lead for the University of Washington Data Science for Social Good program, and is a co-contributor to the Google Earth Engine Community Catalog. Dr. Crotham received her interdisciplinary PhD from University of Alaska Fairbanks with a focus on remote sensing and hydrology. She was a postdoc fellow with the Alaska Climate Adaptation Science Center. Well, I turn it over to Erin now, and thanks very much, Erin, for accepting our invitation. We are ready and excited for your talk.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation today. So I spent a lot of time thinking about what I wanted to talk about today, and I decided to invite you all to join me in thinking out something that I know it like makes it difficult to sometimes look at my work, but I think might provide some clarity, and hopefully we can continue this conversation afterwards. So I decided to talk about creating your own research innovation strategy, because yeah, I do a lot of different types of projects, and so it's not random how I pick what I do, and I do look for certain things. And when I was thinking about like how I look, how I decide what to work on, and how I prioritize things, I realized I couldn't find a model that fit super well what I did. So I decided to walk you guys through kind of some of the thought process behind how I'm trying to think about more comprehensively talking about my work, and providing some better ways to discuss why I'm interested in certain projects and really what's motivating me. So I thought, since you can't see me in person, I'd throw a couple pictures. And so this is a picture from back in 2004. And I am sitting just outside of Dawson City. And this is the first fieldwork project that I ever did. We were working on landslides. I worked for the Yukon Geological Survey. And so at the time, there had been, actually this is 2005, so there was huge forest fires in 2004, so you can see all the burned trees around. This was true in Alaska as well. And then all these landslides started to occur, mostly on the Yukon side. They weren't as bad in Alaska. So as part of our summer job, we went and we mapped out where they were. And so we were using survey grade technology at the time, which was pretty novel. And my probably best claim to fame is that I could be walking through the forest and see just a tree that looked extra off, and then we would be able to find the landslides because we couldn't quite track where they were from the ground versus getting dropped off by the helicopter and then walking around to physically sample these things. So I wanted to put this picture up to just talk about 2005 Erin. So 2005 Erin had a background in physical geography. I knew I wanted to do something, but I didn't really know totally what that was. But this first experience was a really cool project, looking at these landslides, which were preferentially occurring. They definitely were obviously triggered by fire. But when I looked at them, I'm there has to be something to do with water. And so that really piqued my interest for, if I was going to go to grad school, what I might want to study. Is I thought that water was the key to it all. And I think that that's still probably pretty true. So a year later, I got told that I really did have to go to grad school. And so that's actually how I ended up in Fairbanks. I was doing my master's at UIF in hydrology. And at that point, I thought that I would do my master's. That would be cool. I'd go back to Whitehorse. That would be it. I thought I would put this picture up because during my master's, I was working up on the North Slope looking at like Arctic hydrology in the best studied basin in the Arctic, the Imnaviot. And again, I was trying I was like learning how to model it, using hydrology models, and I thought that again, like water was the key because they had these drainage networks, these water tracks, these like striped patterns that you can see on these images all over the place. And when you reviewed the past literature from both the biochemistry side, but also the like water tracing side and the geomorphology side, they all like pretty much agreed that if water fell in the water tracks and they were occupying like about like 50 to 60% of the basin, then it moved incredibly quickly. So if we were trying to model it, I was like, well, what you really want to know is how many of these water tracks are in a basin, and like do they vary basin to basin? And there was no answer for that. So that's what I ended up spending a lot of time focusing my PhD on. So I put this picture up because these are reoccurring slope linei from Mars, and so they have similar phenomenon on Mars. And this like striping phenomenon is just a really immature drainage network, and so so you get these like really parallel stripes, and like I said, water moves incredibly quickly in them. There's a lot of them quite often, and then over time the shapes evolve. And in a permafrost landscape, there's the permafrost itself is a lot of the reason why the landscape is so immature. But as they stay there for longer, they can start to then interact and change the permafrost. So it was a pretty interesting project, and the research after I published a couple papers in Earth and Space Sciences, one on the geomorphology of water tracks and one on mapping them, has been picked up actually by the Mars community, because like I said, they do see similar things there. So that was pretty interesting. And every so often I still get calls from people being like, we're having problems with the water tracks. I'm like, well, of course you are. That's where the problems happen. So anyway, so that was pretty interesting. So when I came back to do a postdoc, I asked myself again, like what is it that I want to do? What's driving me? So my postdoc had a couple different elements to it. I developed policy briefs on permafrost and infrastructure. I mapped surface water all over the Pan-Arctic using this tool called Google Earth Engine and the Landsat record, which was pretty interesting. I worked on the Denali Commission Environmentally Threatened Communities project and was part of the team that evaluated the permafrost risk assessment for all the communities in Alaska. But I put this one up here because I thought that it was a good space for like linking together all the things that I was interested in. So in 2017 we put together a hackathon, but we called it Predict Fest, and so it was a 2-day event in IARC where we had groups that worked together on developing predictions for their Arctic experimental prediction initiative that they were hosting and continues on today. And so I was really interested in like A, how do we do interesting work, but B, how do we cultivate spaces for people to be in there? And so we had 3 main rules, and they were be open, be compassionate, and be engaged. And so then we turned this Predict Fest concept into an NNA one, and we ran a second version of the event in 2022, this past year, in February. So it's been kind of like a reoccurring theme in that I'm really interested in some of these different dimensions of like on the ground science and engineering and what that looks like. I'm interested in definitely some of the policy aspects. That's very important to understand, and it's more similar, at least in my mind, than I think people think. And then obviously I'm interested in like pretty big data things, like the tools behind it. But it's that fourth nexus, how do we work together? That's really important to me. And so I decided not to apply for the teaching jobs. I decided that maybe I was more interested in doing research. And so I've developed a career as a research professor, and I still teach. my teaching though is through the actual practice. And so I love it that other faculty go and like go through the fundamentals with the students. And then I always joke that we like start there and then we see how they like they still apply, but where they break down. And that's when we really start to get into research. And so, yeah, so this is one of the other projects that kind of starts to tie some of these ideas together that I've been working on recently, which is this renewable energy development and electric grid infrastructure in the Arctic region. And so this is called the Arctic Energy Atlas. So I just thought I'd throw this up there because I'm going to talk about it a little bit later. So this has been a project that, again, is working across the Pan-Arctic. It's working on the intersection of both policy and the data side. So having to figure out what is a regional grid, how do we actually map it out in space, and what does this mean? And can we use these concepts to define a new area, like a new version of the Arctic? So that's awesome. That's a great little like snapshot. So what? um, so I think this is why I bring up like having a research innovation strategy is really important, to start asking yourself some of the hard questions both beforehand and afterwards. So why did you work on that project? What are you trying to accomplish, and how did it influence future work? And so it's easiest to frame a research career at 2 points, the beginning and the end. And so that's why I showed you the first picture about like what I would have thought in 2005 when I was like just starting out, just after my undergrad, and I didn't know. And I hope that I'm not anywhere close to the end right now. So you're still seeing me, I would say, in the early to like not quite mid-career, getting there. So I'm really interested in how do we create a narrative and vision for the future that helps supplement just opportunity alone. So I don't actually think that it's just chance that gets us into these projects. I think that we do make a lot more deliberative steps, and I think that they sometimes start farther back than we understand. So I'm really interested in this idea of thinking about how do we create our own innovation strategies to help guide and illuminate our research choices, so that it doesn't look random, so people can understand what's like driving you to make these choices. And then hopefully you can find better projects that like meet your needs, and also collaborators in the future. So when I started talking to people about this, one of my grad students was super awesome. She brought up this paper from 2009 that talks about what's a good question. And so it's by Elon 2009, and we're looking at the feasibility interest diagram for choosing a project. And so it looked at breaking problems out in terms of ease and interest, and that the sweet spot is where there's large gains of knowledge and it's not too hard. And I asked myself, is that actually what I really do? and I'll be honest, not totally actually. Sometimes I will definitely do things the hard way for larger gains in knowledge. I recognize that that's not necessarily like typical, and sometimes I'll definitely often do things for small gains in knowledge because they're easy. And I often tend to ping pong between the two of them a little bit. So while I like appreciated this framing, I was like, yeah, kind of. And then there's the second figure that talks about how the choices of problems along the Pareto front moves through the life stages of a scientist. And this one, I definitely agree with that in working with undergrad students and grad students and like postmasters fellows, and even like fellow faculty, that you do have to be aware of how hard and easy things are, and that like gain in knowledge, that there are like better fits for sure. So this one I like could agree with. But again, I was like, well, is this like really how I work with people? Is this really like how I choose like what projects to work on? And I was like kind of, but not totally. I think there's more going on. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. So when I think about some of the projects that I work on, I like broke it down that like these would be the obvious ways to do it. So you would assume that you would start with like good questions, those lead to projects, and then like you do lots of projects, and then you make a career out of it. Cool. And so what would be some like typical ways of organizing a research portfolio? And they would be chronology, you could do it by technology, you could do it by discipline, you could do like versions of this. And I asked myself, I can see ways to look at my projects and like put it into these buckets. But I don't think this like totally fits my strategy. Like I'm not like you can use it to like break down the projects, but it's not really telling you why I'm doing what I'm doing necessarily. And so I was like, okay, well, cool. This is like good to know about. And so for some people, this might be a really good place to stop. But we're gonna move on. So these are what my current projects look like, and I have another screen of them. So we've got that Arctic Energy Atlas project that's like on this like Pan-Arctic. It's working with Gwen Holdman and Greg Polzer, the University of Saskatchewan. And again, thinking about these like big intersections of energy. I've got a project with Jabaltech, the US Army Corps. We're looking at coastal mapping. We're doing all sorts of things from processing topography, LiDAR data, to doing the field work, to working with undergraduate and like postmaster's fellows, to doing large scale remote sensing, to getting ready to take a really deep dive into machine learning. I have a project on heating loads, again, funded by ERDEC. And on that project, we're using a lot of open geospatial data and machine learning to predict heating loads at the Alaska rail belt level with the eye to scale that to the Pan-Arctic. I have a project called Energy Train Interactions. It's on that same funding, where we're flying drones in Fairbanks, up on the North Slope, and down in Yakutat. We're doing for structure for motion. We're looking for changes in that data. We're also looking at like hydrokinetic information and especially some of the spatial data and doing some work on that. I have a new funded project that goes back to the Environmentally Threatened Communities project that was published in 2019 by the Denali Commission. I'm coming back to that project starting next month, actually. And so we're going to be reviewing that original data and looking at how to more quantitatively assess it, looking at better automatic ways of clustering it, and really thinking about it for decision making. And then we're also going to be expanding on the Arctic Energy Atlas work and looking at what would happen if we connected some of the regional transmission grids to the big continental grids, and what would happen if we start to connect the communities onto these regional transmission grids, as is like the typical pattern. What would that cost, and does it even make sense? And then I've been working on the Alaska Rail Belt decarbonization initiative with an ASAP. And so some of that's through the heating loads, some of it is through just more on the policy, like thinking about it, thinking about the assumptions that we're making. Is it a good idea? And so from those discussions, heating is a huge part of decarbonizing. And so that's actually, that's why I took on this heating loads project, is that they're like, we need heating data. We kind of really needed the level. We need them now. And heating is actually a really, really tough problem. And so that's kind of why I was attracted to it, is I was like, well, I've taken quite a bit of engineering. I had never worked in that space specifically, but I had an idea of what the data was available and how we could attack it. And then, like Mohammed mentioned, I've been working on some of these other like bigger initiatives. So I work with some collaborators, especially Sampiero Roy and Valerie Pasquarella, on this awesome Earth Engine community catalog. And that's where a lot of the data for my other projects, including some of my old ones, I was trying to load it into Earth Engine, and I asked Sam if he would help me load this like ridiculous coastal vector into Earth Engine. And he realized that there must be more errands out there than just me. and that I really wanted the data to be public because I knew that I wasn't just the only one having a problem with this. So from that spun this effort, and that's really like not only just hosting the data, making research data available for reuse in a cloud compute environment. But when you do that, you can start to actually really compare data sets against each other. And that gets very interesting when you work in Arctic regions and you realize that some data that looks great in other places in the world in our regions doesn't look as great for a lot of reasons. And so that's a real opportunity to start to consider data quality issues and how do you know what data sets to compare against each other. So that's a pretty interesting ongoing project. And then, yeah, I contributed to the new textbook that just came out on cloud-based remote sensing with Google Earth Engine. And so that's available for free online, and I'm happy to give you the link. So yeah, so anyways, these are just my current projects, never mind the other stuff that I've done. So yeah, so I've really been thinking, like, what connects all these projects? Is it just interest? Like, could we call it innovation? And so I looked up a few definitions to put in here. And so innovation research involves looking for solution either to known or sometimes to undefined needs. And so I think that that's really important to think that that term has like a very specific thing. Whereas innovative research uses new or novel methods to actually conduct the research, study behaviors, etc. And so both can be part of an innovation strategy in research. So awesome. Stepping back a little bit further. When I went to do a little bit more Googling, it turns out that businesses definitely have been thinking about innovation strategies for a long time. And so when you look at the definition of that in that environment, it's on the screen here. So what types of innovations allow you to create and capture value, and what resources should each type receive? And so in the business world, they're really thinking about the like technology itself, and then they're thinking about the like business's ability to implement it. And that in the model of business itself, there are certain ways that you can tweak it. And I was like, okay, I like kind of get that. But is this a great fit for research? Maybe not totally. So that was kind of where I got to, is that like researchers were not businesses, and that what I could fundamentally say is that like good research does have to innovate. Like we definitely do that. We're not just innovative, but we also do have to look at how to optimize for sure. I think that's how you learn how to stay in this business in the long term. Hence why this strategy part comes in. So I started to reframe it a little bit more like this. So how do different types of innovation and research create value? And does better recognition enhance resource allocation? So if we come up with a strategy that we can like a way to frame what our strategy is looking like, can we enhance resource allocation? Can we figure out how to ask better questions, assess projects, understand where we're sitting in a project, and understand that some of these elements, especially in research, can definitely evolve in time. So this is what I came up with. So I took and modified this figure from Pisano 2015, which is that you need an innovation strategy. And I was like, yes, I like see the value of that. And you can look at it through the business model for sure. And there's lots of things out there. But I really appreciated this idea about thinking of it in terms of a research innovation landscape, and how there's two primary dimensions. So there is the horizontal dimension. So starting with the bottom left in routine. And so that routine means that what you're doing leverages existing jobs, environments, and pathways. So you know the environment that something's going to fit in. And if you move further right, you get into this thing called radical. And that means that you are going to do a new job, environment, pathway. And so do we do that quite often? do we take, and so on this vertical axis in routine, that means that you're going to use existing tools, methods, or technology. And so I'll tell you my secret. My secret is that I tend to go to the right. So I tend to go from routine to do research of like where is this like tool, method, or technology being used? What environment is it coming from? So I'm sitting in the Arctic generally doing my thing, wanting to do this thing. Can we just shift over? And that is my like favorite research strategy actually of all time. So full disclosure. So yeah, so we could call it radical if we want to underneath this model. So and this is actually like, especially in our Arctic environments, I think pretty common. It also can be really prone to failure though, full disclosure. That doesn't always work. So that's important to be cognizant of. And so then there's this other axis that you can move vertically, where, yeah, so you've got the existing technology and routine, that's great. And then you go up and you need new tools, methods, or technology. And so if you just move vertically in that, so you know the job, that's not like the problem, you just need a better way to do it, then that's where you get into what's known as disruptive. And so I feel like in some of the technology space that I've worked in terms of like why I pushed into the like the big data, it can feel disruptive. It's actually often not. It's actually more in the radical space. You're just doing it in a new place. But sometimes you can absolutely get into the disruptive environment. And we're gonna talk a little bit more about that. So what if you do both things? What if you don't know? you know that you need like a new environment, you need a new like place for your tool to go, and you need a new tool, and you combine both of those together, then you get known, or then you get into what's known as the architectural space. And so essentially you're building a new building, you just don't really know what it's for, you don't know what it's going to look like, and you're working to figure that out. And a lot of, I think, projects would like to be architectural. I would say they don't need to though. I would say that like playing in that space can be very challenging actually. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that like through this. And so, but for me, I found that this framing, when I started to think about some of my projects, and we're going to walk through that, some of this is really helpful for like breaking out in my projects what I'm looking for, and even within the teams that I'm working with, who's playing what role. And so I'm proposing this as like a new space essentially to start thinking about projects, evaluating them and discussing them. Because when you're looking and proposing a project, if you're proposing something that yeah, is out in that architectural space, again, I would tell you to think very carefully about if you really want to be there, or can you move in these other dimensions instead, and is there still a lot of value in there? And I would argue that there is actually. And so my thing to have you think about is that like personally is which axis is your preferred? Have you started to have projects that like go around there? And I think that that's actually part of my strategy is in trying to travel around these different squares, and I enjoy it because it does feel differently. It's fresh, and it gives me opportunities to like both recharge but also do some really interesting things. And yeah, so I think so I just wanted to start with this. But yeah, but I started to just talk a little bit about this a little bit. And so I wanted to just really emphasize though, that although we're talking about creating like a personal research innovation strategy, because I think if you're going to have a career in research, you do need one. It is really helpful to understand like why you're doing what you're doing. Good research and like doing like really interesting research really benefits from teams. It's almost never done in a vacuum. And even in graduate school where you're being trained to like quote unquote do it on your own, you're not really doing it on your own. Well, maybe you are. I definitely was sometimes, but really it's a lot healthier. And the reality is that you do work in teams a lot of the time, and that there's value from that. So yeah, so I thought I'd go back and I'd show you one of the first teams that I worked with my boss at the time, Panya Lipovsky, that was on the landslides. In the middle is Michelle Brocious. So she was the first field assistant that I worked with on my PhD. We spent a couple summers up in the Arctic, walking around and looking at water tracks and measuring things. And then most recently on the far right-hand side, this is Nicole Helder, myself, and then Sampiero Roy. And we were just at the Geo for Good. And so you can kind of just in the background make out the Google sign. So yeah, it's as teams evolve over time. And so in this, I was in different roles. So on the far left, I was the assistant. I was like helping things out. I got to take the naps. It was really awesome. In the middle, I was starting the journey of like leading my own project, working with another person, teaching them. And then in the picture on the far right, I get to work with one of my peers, Sam, which is really amazing, and then bring in one of my graduate fellows, Nicole, to work with us, and to get to be to socialize and start to think about things together. So yeah, so I think that it's good to remember that this path is really natural, but I'm going to talk a little bit afterwards about how when I work with students, how this fits into it. So and then like Mohammed mentioned, I thought I would throw this one in as well. And just to really, this is really driven home when I worked with the University of Washington Data Science for Social Good. So this is my first time leading a larger team. And so I had our data scientist, Nick, down here. And then we have Philippe and Shamsi and Maddie and Vidisha. And so they were graduate students from Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, and the University of Washington. So yeah, so it was a pretty amazing opportunity to see if you really create this team environment that people feel comfortable and they can thrive, and this way to start to talk about research and think, because we all came in with very different backgrounds and skills and experiences. How can you use that to leverage each other? And so upon reflection, did we all come from different parts in that landscape? Actually, we did. And we were taking something that could have been pretty routine and putting it out, pushing it out. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. Oh, actually here, actually. So yeah, so on the team, the heating loads project, the whole premise of the idea should have been routine. So all the buildings exist. We have good data to be able to track when the buildings change over time, and there should be a database actually that will be able to easily join and to estimate the heating loads, and then we can extrapolate it with the climate data. Cool. Of course, like any research project, it wasn't quite that simple. The buildings data were incomplete. The original data set that we were looking at that was tracking building ages was also incomplete, and so we had to switch. The climate data was there. That was really awesome. That was the easiest one. And we got the data set, the ARIS data set that we've been using a little bit late. And now we're working on the joining actually of that. And so we started off with what could have been a routine project and went just to the right. We tried to use the existing tools just in a new place, so on this problem. And then we realized, and that worked actually pretty well for a while. So we were doing that lateral move, awesome. That got us to about the end of the summer. And what we realized, especially recently, is that we're getting into this disruptive element, and that's in being able to take this database of individual houses that has had the actual locations removed, which is great. So that means that we don't actually know where your house is, but we know the zip code, and we do know where the buildings are. And so we want to join the two data sets together. Doing that is quite a nasty problem, actually. So I was fortunate to listen to our graduate student Vidisha talk about go through the process of like having to do this in like very, very finite detail. She was really amazing at describing like what it would take. And I was sitting there and I was like, I don't want to do this. This is going to take too long. And and it will work, but it's not like, I just this doesn't this is just not the best solution. This is going to be really hard, and like there should be an easier way. And so that's what we're doing actually, is we're almost certainly going to be running machine learning twice in this in this project. So once to look at extrapolating the climate data out from the buildings, um, but actually initially as well to join the or the anonymized building data to the actual buildings themselves. And the easiest way will be to use machine learning actually to develop either like a single mega model or hopefully smaller individual models to make the join. So yeah, so anyway, so on this project, some of the students that I'm working with, they are a lot more, they're coming from this data science background. Some of them also like are coming from mechanical engineering. And so for them, it's not personally, so it's like they're pushing out into this disruptive element. And for me, we're starting to do this a little bit more too. It doesn't feel as disruptive for me. For me, it feels a little bit more radical. We're just taking tools that we know, or methods that we know exist, and we're pushing them out to this new environment. But doing that join that way is a novel way to make a nasty problem a lot easier. And so that I would say is some of the disruptive element. So that's one project that, like I said, I thought would be routine and is not turning out to be routine. It's pushing into both of these elements. Would I call it architectural though? No, I wouldn't actually. I would say that like different members of the team are taking turns and like collectively we're moving into this different space. But I wouldn't say that we're like truly making something where we're uncomfortable in both dimensions. We tend to make either a lateral move or a vertical move, or have people in both of them. But we do know where we are, and we know how we're pushing. And so so it's been a really enjoyable project to work on, and it's felt like we're making a lot of progress. And so I just wanted to start with this one. So in our coastal mapping, again, we started with doing some pretty routine things. And this project also includes bringing on undergrads, actually. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about this project because why routine can be a pretty amazing thing, actually. And so when I work with undergrads, I do not try to take them out into these different dimensions to start off with. I try to construct tasks that for me are routine, and for them they will the point is for them to learn for it to feel routine. And I think that's a really important consideration, that there is value to understanding what's routine before before going in the square and starting to travel around. And so I really appreciate in the engineering engineering education that I feel like a lot of the early education is really focused on this, making routine feel routine, and then starting to think about pushing into these bigger boxes. I will say though that I think a lot of the pushing academically happens more on the graduate side. And I think a big thing too, if I can give any take home to graduate students, I would suggest trying to only push in one dimension, because I think it's hard enough. And I know, speaking from my own PhD experience, I think that the PhD experience really often does push in one of these dimensions more than others. And ideally you have an advisor that's sitting in another one, so they're a lot more comfortable with what's with something that's happening. It might be a new environment for them, but it's not necessarily a new technology actually. Whereas the grad student can be learning a new technology, but they don't necessarily, for them it's already a known environment. And so I've had projects like that. So in this coastal mapping project, that's what's been happening actually. And so when I came on the project, I have a background in Arctic hydrology and remote sensing. but I'd actually never done anything on the coast before. So I've been fortunate to work with Jeremy Casper on this. And so he asked me how I felt about it. And I was like, well, it's still just water, which is true. So it's been really interesting to enter this space and to figure out what is routine in a new environment, and not to assume that like I have to like step out into this architectural space, but to take the time within a like a field with its own multiple fields within their own paradigms, what is routine. And with my background in remote sensing and interest in machine learning, it's pretty easy to be disruptive actually, because I'm sitting there having applied it in like different different environments, but it hasn't been as like widely applied in that environment. And so that's pretty interesting. One take home that I want to highlight from this project is that I'm actually interested in doing is taking things that like are disruptive in that environment and actually making them routine. There's a lot of value in that as well, so that you can increase the disruptive element actually. And some of how we do that is by pulling it back into the routine. And so on that project, the intersection between the big data, the satellite imagery, the time dimension to a lot of that data, the dynamics in the coastal and ocean environments, and the opportunities to do big learning, especially in a cloud computing environment, make it pretty easy to actually be radical. Um, um, so, but actually like really be somewhat disruptive. And so what I'm really interested in doing is working with students and teaching them the skills so that they can actually figure out better ways to apply the models to answer the question. So I think when I've been working in the field so far, we've been mostly focused on or a lot of the emphasis has been put on answering what I would still call like basic data questions, and not really pushing on to like, what do people want to do with it? And that will require different models actually, and not a dissimilar approach when you're using the satellite data, the machine learning, and like in the cloud compute. But you'll set the models up differently, and actually some of them will probably like go work more readily. So that's a good thing to think about. I did want to highlight a project though that does feel a lot more architectural to me. And so yeah, so this is this awesome Earth Engine community catalog. And so it is essentially taking, like I said, research data sets, pulling them into the cloud compute environment. We're working on becoming stack compliant, so making sure like metadata is reflected accurately so it can be interoperable between systems. That'll be really exciting in a cloud environment. And so that's required, especially like my colleague, like Saint-Pierre Roy, to do quite a bit more like tool development about how to like pull data in more effectively, much more quickly, how to convert data a lot faster. And I feel like I've often been sitting in the radical space, but I think he often has too. But like where can we pull data into this catalog that wouldn't otherwise get used? And so we want to make it more available for use on different projects, and to give you the opportunity to not only look at data within your discipline, but in those complementary areas as well. And so that's where like moving to this big data cloud environment allows you to do that. And so when the two things come together and you start to really think about, like I alluded to, these data quality issues, like how do you know how good data is? That's really challenging. It's really easy if you're just looking and testing the data against itself to think that you're doing a good job. It's when you start to look at the interactions against other data sets and understand where the data is doing a good job and where it's maybe not, and if that's overlapping, and then what you're trying to do with it, that becomes super interesting, especially like for like how do you fix it, but first of all, how do you even recognize that it's happening, and then what is that telling us? So this is one of the projects that I would say is definitely like pushing out into that architectural space. One thing though that I want to really highlight is that it is definitely a team that gets you there. And it's really important for that team to be really aligned. A lot of like values, how you want to work together, what your interests are, how to get the work to like evolve together. There's a lot of dimensions that go into playing in that architectural space, and so yeah, so it's really nice to be able to start to work in there. So yeah, so some of what I just talked about, I especially when working in this architectural space, but all along, the other thing that I'm always asking myself is, yeah, so how am I traveling around? How are we working together in this research or this innovation landscape? But I really appreciated this concept of the golden circle, and so this is from Simon Sinek, and he's got a book called "Start with Why: How Great Leaders Inspire Everyone to Take Action." So when I'm working on projects, I totally am doing this. I'm starting by asking myself, like, why am I doing this? Is there something that interests me? And I don't always have like a perfect answer for that, nor does it ever have to be like a complex answer. And so I like put the representation of the mountain, like sometimes you can just appreciate the mountain being there, and that's enough of a reason to like want to go climb it. It just is there. You don't, it's not even about getting to the top, it's there and you want to do it. And so if knowing and being able to target that why is really key to motivation and success. And on teams, taking the time to understand what are different people's whys, what like what's exciting to them, what are they passionate about, and developing the flexibility to align those visions together is incredibly valuable, because if you can do it in the first place, when things start to get hard, it's really critical to be able to do it again. And so if you know the why, then it's a lot easier to back out the how and then the what. So the how being like the trail and how you're going to get up there, and then the what is, in this example, you're going to hike. So, and when I took mediation training, this was true too. So the first thing that they teach you in mediation is more of a traditional mediation strategy, and it starts on the outside of the circle. And you spend most of your time talking about what and how, and you are not allowed to talk about why for a long time. And I really disliked it, actually. I found it really frustrating. It just didn't work for me. And there is an alternate mediation strategy that actually does the opposite, and it starts out with the why, and it encourages you to vision together. And then once you've co-developed like some agreement on what that vision looks like, you can go and talk about the hows and the whats. And what I found, especially working on teams, is when you do start with that why, the team is a lot stronger. And sometimes people leave at that stage, and that's fine. But that's a great time to like realize that you don't have alignment with them, and that like they can go do something else. And so yeah, so I think that's really important to remember. And a big key on this is that that why is really, like I mentioned, really tangential and like completely linked to motivation. And that motivation isn't really about strategy, it's actually about emotion. So for all that we're talking about a strategy, it's really important within that strategy that we're acknowledging the role that our emotions play in how we may feel at the time, what we're going to do about it, and how by being able to manage not only our own emotions, but work with the emotions of the people around us and their whys, that we can travel around this circle or this innovation landscape a lot more successfully, I would argue, a lot more like flexibly, and yeah, just be able to be like more adaptive and hopefully ultimately more successful. So yeah, so anyway, so I kind of covered this, which is that, yeah, taking the time to understand and align the why, in my opinion, is always a good use of time and effort. And so it doesn't matter at what like career stage people are at. I love that like the undergrads that we work with are so passionate. They generally want to save the world, and that's amazing. And so how do we acknowledge that and make sure that we're giving them like a growth-minded opportunities to feel like they're contributing to that. And then like in the graduate education, again, like reality starts to set in and you realize that your part's going to be a little bit smaller, but that those motivations still haven't gone away. And so we need to be contributing to both like personal success as well as professional success, as well as longevity in a career that suits them. And then like the big thing about this is that during challenging times, the big thing is being able to revisit it. And so giving like being able to talk about it more openly, and understanding that yours may look different, but where can you find those connections is incredibly valuable. So yeah, so I was kind of touching on this. And so when I talk about like doing research with undergrads, and I've been talking a little bit about emotions, one thing that we talk about from the get-go is how are you feeling? And we do this on like our Monday meeting. And one thing that I've really been working on like myself over the last couple of years is to really recognize that emotions are not good or bad, but they're really comfortable and uncomfortable. And especially when we do research, we are absolutely pushing out into those uncomfortable areas. And as we, in that that innovation landscape map, as we go like vertically or horizontally, it definitely gets more uncomfortable out there. It requires a lot more energy to be out there, and you can't stay out there forever is the thing. So it's valuable to come back into that routine space and make it comfortable. And so how do we acknowledge that and I'm showing this as like starting out uncomfortable, but actually a lot of people start out in this space as uncomfortable. And so how do we create opportunities to come into this comfortable space, go back into the uncomfortable, and like be okay and develop resilience, especially in that uncomfortable side, and the skills to be able to be there, but also not keep them forever, because that's not good. It's good to be able to relax. You can, as an athlete, one of the things that we know about like being in high performance is that it's not just about working hard, it's about being the best rester as well. And so you need to be able to flexibly go back and forth between these two areas. And then I've got the place in the bottom, which is that unsafe. And so when you're in these uncomfortable places, they absolutely can become unsafe, and they can become unsafe for a lot of reasons, sometimes related, not even related to the project. It's just life. Like something comes along and makes it too difficult. And so it can be psychologically, it can be emotional, it can be physical. There are a lot of things that can like go into the red zone. And so it's really important that we are monitoring how people are doing in that comfortable or an uncomfortable area, because it makes it easier to recognize when that boundary is crossed, and to just see it coming, hopefully not pop over, but if you do, know it for what it is and be able to like pull back a lot more quickly. And so yeah, so in working in this like research and innovation like landscape and thinking about our strategy, this journey and how people like feel and their emotions is a really critical part. So yeah, so I was gonna wrap it up around here and just go over some conclusions, which is that taking the time to develop your own research strategy and thinking about like what feels comfortable to you and how you're evaluating projects is really valuable. So one of the people that helped me discuss this project had a great suggestion. She was like, you need to print out the landscape thing big so you can put it on your wall. So when you're talking about it, you can like be discussing where you are on the map or on the squares. And I was like, that's a great idea. I think that will be super valuable, especially because we like when we have what I call are the research questions, and we definitely have those discussions on our individual projects. And yeah, knowing where we are, I think, is really helpful. And also when we're working on projects, understanding, like I said, who's bringing what to the table. And so when we're evaluating projects, is it a good idea? Do we actually want to be in those spaces? Is it a good place for us to be? That's a great question. And so, yeah, so there is no one size fits all in this. I think that's really important to remember. And that, yeah, I'm really interested in thinking about how research innovation strategy can help frame where you are and illuminate where you want to go, and that there are overlaps to business. But ultimately, I would say that research, especially good research, is really driven by curiosity and resilience in the face of the unknown. And so, yeah, so with that, any questions, comments, or personal reflections from anybody in the room or online?
Thank you very much, Dr. Trojan, for a great presentation. Any questions? Hey, I have one question. It's been one of the most interesting presentations because mostly our speakers, our guests, come here, share their results, their projects. But your presentation is mostly about how to do the project and how to do the research, giving us some strategy around that. One of the things that I'm very interested in learning more about is how, or it would be nice if you could share your thoughts on how you handle pressure and uncertainty in research, because I think you've been working on a variety of projects, long list of projects, and I can only imagine how hard that could be, and I know how successful you are. How can you handle that much pressure and uncertainty? What if there is an approaching deadline? If things go beyond control?
Ah, yes. um, so that's why this innovation landscape part is actually telling you a lot actually about what I'm doing. That's why, like, the more that I thought it out, the more that I realized that I use this actually a lot. So
Of course, that makes sense, but I'm just looking for more tangible examples,
yeah.
like some real world examples, so we can better understand.
Totally. Yeah. So how do I keep things on track? Well, I'll tell you one of my like biggest strategies. So the people that I play in the architectural space with the most, one thing that we all do is we all imagine what the worst thing looks like. And it is I will like on a like when I'm evaluating a project, I will break down all the bad things that can happen. So when they do happen, I'm not very surprised. And so that's a one strategy that I try to apply personally is rather than starting a problem by solving it, I actually start a problem by breaking it. And that helps me not be surprised when things break. And that's why I mentioned that in why I think research and business can often be very different is that in research that's very normal. Things don't work or they take longer or people leave or you run out of money. And so yeah, so I start off by like deconstructing a project, and if I don't know how to do it, I go and find people that do. So that's like one thing that I very like personally do a lot. And the bigger the project, the more that I give myself time to come up to speed in that routine space before doing anything actually. So on that coastal mapping project, we picked projects that like I knew were more routine to start off with in order to be able to gauge the time and the effort necessary to push into these bigger spaces. And so that's why I mentioned like there's real value to being in that gray box. And a lot of it is understanding, yeah, what's going to go wrong, but also how long something is going to take. And I think in research, we often don't give ourselves enough time for that, especially if we're like changing disciplines or we are like working in a new environment, especially. We just don't do that. And we don't and a lot of the research like funding pushes us and says like, oh, we have to go like way out there to start off with. And you can if somebody else is already comfortable out there and you're just like crossing those boxes. So that's a big thing is that A, I like try to figure out what's going to go wrong. B, I actually try to go into routine first. And C, if I have to push really quickly, then I try to find somebody that is sitting in that like alternate space that'll make it go a lot faster, make it like much more like go a lot more quickly. But for working with students, working with students, especially like at the undergrad level, it really, you really like that. That's why I mentioned this is a good framing. So you really want to stay like more in that routine. It's going to take longer, and spending a little bit more of that time like aligning like their expectations into that norm is really critical, before like doing those pushes. And so that's part of my strategy, I guess, is that I don't assume that everybody is as flexible as me and moving around it. I don't assume that my flexibility applies in every environment that I work in. I try to give myself more time to like figure out what that looks like. And by doing that, it's easier to see where you can make these strategic moves. It's not, you can't just like helicopter into a space and figure out what it's going to look like. I think that the only way that that works is if you happen to align with really good people, especially at that peer level, that have very strong skills that allow you to like occupy that space very readily. But that, I would argue, is really unusual, and I think it's not actually realistic. It's not a realistic expectation that research pushes on us as as a thing that we should just be able to do. I think it takes more time. There's more on that people dimension, and this is starting to be reflected in some of the funding calls where they're giving time for projects to like come up to speed for a year. And so I think of that as like that's the year where, yeah, you play in this routine, you figure out how everybody works together, and then you can like make these pushes. And so that's some of the like tangible things that I do essentially.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, so no, I liked your previous answer there with, I'm used to thinking of it kind of as a risk register for projects and project management. But yeah, just kind of identifying where things might go wrong, right? For my question, I was wondering about the new jobs and environments and pathways that you get the most excited about, and then the same question for the tools and methodologies and technology.
Yeah, so for the the new tools, methodologies, and technology side, that's pretty easy. There's just a ton on like the machine learning side that we can do. Not even like, I don't even think about like solving more complex problems a lot of the time. I think there's a lot of opportunity to take complex problems and solve them a lot more simply, and to understand where that applies more effectively. So I would say that actually it's pretty easy to be disruptive. And on the radical side, I would also say that there's, again, in the like machine learning big data space, there's actually a lot of things that are I would call them existing technologies now. And there's a lot of opportunities to especially apply them in our Arctic environment where we have a lot of uncertainty. Things like a lot of the big like global models don't work very well. Things do break actually. And so that's why I mentioned like really using, especially on the engineering side, I love talking to a lot of older engineers and understanding what the problems are, because there's often a technology out there now that solves some of it. We're just not using it here. And so it's very easy to like make that like leap over, and to like adopt it much more quickly. From a student side, though, when you use students, I would say that there's more opportunity though for them to be disruptive in some ways, which is that like through that like either that simplification or through the targeting in the Arctic environments. So sometimes we you can like look at everything being a problem, but actually like one element like really like the water tracks, like water goes downhill. If water goes downhill and there's ice there, A, it's more likely to thermokarst, but B, the water still has to go somewhere. So even if you build something in front of it, like the water is still going to be there. So what do you do? And so if you knew all of those things about that environment, you could go and apply like technology, but especially like methods to more effectively deal with that. It doesn't really require a new environment. It requires like a different approach, is what I would say. And so yeah, so I think really considering which problem space you're in is really critical. In particular, in the disruptive side, often it's that you don't really know what the question is. And so spending some time like thinking about like, what if it goes wrong? Do you care about that? Or are you just like, do you actually already know what you're going to do? And finding like what those like pain points are can spur the actually developing something more interesting versus that radical side where yeah, there's a lot of opportunity to lift technology into our space pretty easily. And we should absolutely be taking advantage of that more.
Oh, thank you. Any other questions? All right, so thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today, and thanks, Dr. Burton, for a great presentation. Please follow our website for future seminar series. Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
There a code word today?
Strategy.